everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for tuning in to TechCabal Live. My name is Koromone Koroye. I am the managing editor at TechCabal. And this morning, I am pleased to host Tsakane Ngoepe. She is the chief of staff at M-KOPA. She's the one waving at us right now. And if you don't know, M-KOPA stands for Mobile Kopa, and Kopa is Swahili for borrow. I hope I am correct there, and my sources have not lied to me. And so M-KOPA is really focused on connecting Africans or the Africans that they serve to asset financing platforms, right? So they provide services to underbanked customers in Africa so that these customers can access essential products like solar lighting, televisions, fridges, smartphones, and financial services. As we know, when it comes to financial services, there is a severe gap that exists in Africa, and companies like M-KOPA are working very hard to bridge those gaps. So we're really, really excited and really honored to have Tsakane come to talk to us, not only about her career trajectory, what it means to be a chief of staff at a company, and basically any other information she wants us to know about M-KOPA. But the core topic for today is effectively managing a multi-dimensional workforce. So I'm going to have Tsakane come up, rather unmute her mic because this is virtual. I will have her unmute her mic and let us know a little bit of herself. I'm going to give a proper speaker introduction shortly, but I just want you guys to hear Tsakane's voice and have her just say hello to us.
Yeah, thanks so much, KK, and thanks so much for having me today. Really excited to be here. My name's Tsakane. I am South African, but I've been living in Nairobi for the last 5 years, working in the tech and investment space. And as KK said, at M-KOPA, I'm the chief of staff. I'm sure we'll be talking a little bit more about what that means at M-KOPA and at different companies. But yeah, really excited for the conversation today.
Really excited about what M-KOPA is doing. Just to let you know about M-KOPA, they have received since launch over $185 million in funding, which I think is fantastic. They are in the energy/financial services industry, and they were established in 2011, and they've really done a lot of great stuff, and they've expanded into Uganda and Nigeria as well. So yes, M-KOPA does exist in Nigeria. If you've never heard of M-KOPA, you should just do a quick search and you get all you need to know. So that's my little intro. I don't know if I'm missing anything else. If I am not, we can launch right into it. Yeah, Tsakane, are we good? Okay, fantastic. So what we're going to do now is launch right into the main segment. I'm going to be asking Tsakane some questions, which you'll be answering. Okay, so my first question for you is, how has your career progressed over the years? And do you have a clear picture of what it will look like in 5 to 10 years, if you do?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think you've already introduced a little bit of my career trajectory, so I'll try to add a little bit of color to that through kind of 3 really quick stories. I started university in Cape Town thinking that I was going to be an actuary. That didn't really work out for me. I absolutely hated my studies when I was doing that, and ended up dropping out of actuarial sciences to complete a finance degree. And I remember in my last year doing finance, we were doing the usual recruitment cycle. You talk to people in the consulting space, investment banking, chartered accountants. That was the kind of typical trajectory path that was being promoted a lot on campus. But I really had this kind of feeling inside me that I wanted to work in an industry where I felt like I was making an impact, but still in the kind of finance space. So I was doing a lot of soul searching at that time. And that's when I came across this term of impact investing or innovative finance. And at the time in South Africa, the leading institution around impact investing was the Bertha Center for Social Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And they happened to be hiring. They were hiring for a project manager with 5 years work experience, with a CFA qualification, and also somebody who had done a master's degree. But I didn't care. I was like, this role looks so interesting. I finally found an organization that's working around impact investing. I don't care that I don't meet any of these requirements. I'm just going to apply. So I guess I took the shoot your shot approach. And I was very lucky that they ended up interviewing me. And I remember getting into the interview room and they said, so look, you're not qualified for this job, but we were really, impressed by your enthusiasm and the research that you did, and we'd love to find another role for you to do. So that's how I ended up kind of working at the Bertha Center as an investment analyst, which I really loved. It exposed me not just to impact investing in South Africa, but also across Africa. And I was also doing a lot of work with international organizations like the World Bank, Wallace Global Foundation, Johnson & Johnson on various impact investing projects. So that was really exciting for me. The change or transition started to happen as I started to work with more investment funds and kind of meeting analysts and associates from other funds that were actually working on transactions. And I started to get really curious about that. And I remember telling my boss at the time, I think I want to do more of that. But we didn't really do investments at the Bertha Center. So they gave me an opportunity to do a externship, so basically work for an investment fund 1 day out of 5. And after doing that, I was convinced that that's what I wanted to do. And this is really when my network that I had built in the impact investing work at the Bertha Center became really helpful, because I already knew a lot of the fund managers that were operating in this space. And I reached out, and AHL Venture Partners happened to be hiring. I must be honest, I had never been to Nairobi before, but they interviewed me, they offered me the job, and I was like, I don't care. I'm packing my bags and really going for this opportunity that I wanted. So I moved to Nairobi in January 2017. I spent about 2.5 years at AHL Venture Partners, mostly focused on Fintech and energy access and investments, doing quite a few transactions, which I really enjoyed. But this always happens. Once you're in the room, in the boardroom with all these investors and entrepreneurs, you start to get a better picture of the operations of a business, the challenges of running and scaling a business. And the more I experienced that, the more I thought, wait a minute, I want to be in that room, with the operators. And M-KOPA is actually one of AHL's early investments. And so I already knew the M-KOPA team. It was a relatively easy transition for me, kind of going from investing to working as chief of staff at M-KOPA. So yeah, that's a little bit of color on the introduction that you already gave, KK, in terms of my career so far. I have no idea what I'll be doing in 5 to 10 years time. I'm not one of those people who has like a 5-year plan or like a clear career ladder that they're trying to climb. So I'm not sure what the next 5 to 10 years hold for me, but I'm pretty excited about it.
So based on your responses, it's clear that you are someone who, if you see something that you want to do or a job that interests you, you're going to go for it. So it's likely that you're not going to have a traditional or linear career path, which I think is fine, right? So I believe that one of the key takeaways here is that if you see something that excites you, go for it, right? And it's important to note what Tsakane said. When she applied for the role, they did say that she didn't have the experience, but they did have something else for her, right? And you never know, that could potentially happen for you, but it can't happen unless you actually make the first move, and she also moved for the job as well, which means that she had to experience a new country, right? And a new city as well, so if you want to have an unconventional career path, just remember that it may take you to countries or to cities that you've never lived in before or never had any experience living in. So be ready for that. Thank you so much. That was a great response. So my next question is, now being a young African woman in tech, or having worked, like you said, you've sat in these boardrooms, you've talked to entrepreneurs, different types, investors. We know that the investor market is very, very, very male heavy. I'm so sorry. Okay, sorry about that. We know that the investor market is very, very male heavy, so it may not have been super easy to have been in those rooms. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges you have faced as a young African woman in tech? And if you have any sort of tips or word of advice for young women who are transitioning into working in tech or who are currently working in tech and are facing similar challenges.
Yeah, sure. I've certainly worked in what have tended to be very kind of male dominated spaces. And I started working when I was 20. So when I started my first job at the Bertha Center, I was fairly young. And so, walking into meetings, and I was also like the most junior person on our team at the time. So walking into any meetings, a lot of the assumptions that people made was that I was an assistant, like, oh, she's just an assistant, she's just here to take notes. Not that there's anything wrong with being an assistant, but it was kind of like, that's the first assumption people made, kind of based on my age and to some extent my race, which was a little bit uncomfortable. That changed a little bit over time as I progressed in my career. But I would say, I think the biggest challenges for me have been, what seem like the small things, I guess what they these days call microaggressions, right? So you're sitting in a boardroom of like 10 to 12 people, or you are in a meeting with an entrepreneur and you have a male colleague with you, and they will kind of direct the questions or conversations towards your male colleague, or assume that your male colleague is the like main decision maker on the conversation. And I think that can be a little bit demoralizing. But I think my advice for dealing with that is twofold. I think one, like, don't back down. Even if this person's trying to like redirect the relevant questions for you to somebody else, be like, I'll take that question, or that's my area. So I think that's one thing, to kind of not back down and really have that confidence. But I think behind confidence has to be one core thing, which is competence, right? Like, you cannot expect people to respect you or respect your opinions or whatever you have to say in a meeting when you have not demonstrated that you can add any value or that you are competent at the things that you are talking about. So I see a lot of times people giving advice about being more confident, but the thing that should give you more confidence is knowing that you are, totally kick-ass at what you do, and your stuff, front to back. So I would say, one, make sure that you build the confidence, your stuff, because that's really the foundation that you need to be really confident in those rooms. And, don't back down when other people are kind of underestimating you in those spaces.
I really love, when you're talking about not backing down, I love that you said when a question that should be directed at you, not because you're a woman, but because you have the area of you have expertise in that area. I like that you said it's possible for you to actually draw that conversation back to you and say, hey, I think I'm better suited to answer that question, right? And that's not you being passive aggressive or whatever the case may be. It's you genuinely saying, I actually think you're asking the wrong person, and I shouldn't be overlooked because I am a woman. And I also love this line about be competent. So you're right. There's a lot of advice out there about being confident, about the affirmations and all of that, and that's superb. But competence is key, right? And if you know anything about working in Africa, you know that competency is a struggle. So if you're able to stand out as being someone who is competent and who can being a woman rather who is competent and who can add value, especially in the tech industry that has been male dominated for years, your chances of advancing in your career or going up those steps of the ladder, whatever it is whatever goals you have, you're likely to achieve them when you're able to do these things. Don't back down and be competent. So thank you. Great responses. Okay, so
if I can add one more thing to that is, of course, there's, women are across African tech and investing quite underrepresented. And I think there is a bigger push coming now from both companies and investment funds to try to become more diverse, because, you know, the value of that has been shown in many studies in terms of company performance, investment returns. So there's also just now a really unique opportunity, right, as any young African woman in the tech space, as if you're performing, because there are just so few women in the industry, you'll get a lot of really exciting opportunities. So I think, you know, there's lots of progress and hunger to find talented women in the space, and that's something that we should kind of take advantage of.
Absolutely, absolutely, I agree. And that actually sort of partly answers the next question I was going to ask you, which is, what are your thoughts on getting more African women interested and involved in tech? And you've answered part of it by saying that those opportunities exist, and there are companies who are looking for talented women to come into the tech industry. Do you have any other thoughts to share? Do you think that we should be positioning ourselves in a different way than we are right now? Because we still have a long way to go, right? We still have ways to go. And for me, I'm really eager to see more young women come into the industry. Do you have any other thoughts you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, whenever I'm really asked this question around what should we do to get more women in the investing or tech space, it's like, well, you know, the answer is simple. Like, fund women entrepreneurs, hire women and sponsor them to make sure that they grow in their careers. But maybe just two things that I would want to highlight that are a little bit hidden in that is, you know, we tend to focus a lot on let's get women into tech. But when you look at a lot of companies at the junior kind of layers, you'll find that it's actually pretty balanced. It's only as you go kind of further up the leadership chain that the diversity starts to look a little bit thin. And so, you know, as a company or a fund, you have to ask yourself, what is it about my working environment that makes it so that there are not women in my organization that are progressing towards leadership positions? And for me personally, one of the things that has really helped me in my career is just like having mentors or sponsors. And I think there's a good nuance between those two things. I would say almost every single boss I had was just like a great sponsor. And most of my bosses to date have been women. And being a sponsor means you're not just helping somebody think through their career or providing advice. It means you're advocating for them in the organization. And this is particularly important for women because, you know, they tend to be overlooked for promotions and, you know, tend to get quite biased feedback. So having somebody pretty senior in an organization who knows your work, knows the quality of your work, and can very confidently kind of promote you is really powerful. The last thing is on just what we have out there as role models that we can look up to as women in the tech space. I think, you know, there are a lot more that have been kind of profiled, particularly over the last 2 or 3 years. That's been, you know, really exciting, very different from, you know, 5-6 years ago when before I entered the space, there was very few role models. But there tends to be this, in African tech media, there tends to be this big focus on founders and CEOs. And that's great because obviously it's a very brave, big thing to start a company. But, you know, there's a huge community of other types of leaders in a company. And I think we need to tell more diverse stories in terms of different careers that people have in tech, so that, you know, we're not just thinking about, oh, I want to be a CEO in tech or co-founder. There are lots of really other interesting roles. And the more diverse roles we show, I think that will be really helpful, especially considering the fact that there are actually very few, you know, African women founders and CEOs today. So, you know, the broader we shine that light on other roles, the better.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about having more sponsors and mentors who are dedicated to helping, you know, women in tech, helping them, sort of grooming them in their career and understanding, or helping them understand what they need to either get into these leadership positions or present themselves as executives who can be hired into these positions. When I came into the tech industry, the three co-founders of the first company I worked in were all men, right? So my mentors were men, right? Now, would I have wanted a like sprinkle of women in there? Absolutely. But even as I moved to other companies, it was this exact same thing, right? So now I have great male mentors, but now being in Big Cabal and working for TechCabal, I am now being more deliberate about reaching out to women, more women leaders, more women managers, and saying, hey, tell me about your journey, because like you said, there's so many stories about founders. That's great, but even better would be reading stories about women who are founders, women who are in senior leadership positions, especially in the tech industry, because women need to see other women succeeding for us to believe that it is possible for us, especially in this ecosystem. So I really love that. And I'm hoping that if you're in the audience and you're a founder or you're a leader, I'm hoping that you would be a bit more intentional about ensuring that when you are promoting, because like Tsakane said, when you look in the junior level, it's balanced, but when you go up a bit higher, it's not. So if you're, thinking about shifting people around, consider that same balance that exists at a lower level also exists at a higher level. So thank you for that. You're making some really great points here. So next question, we're just limping out of the pandemic, barely. We're limping out, barely managed it. So what was your experience like? I mean, you joined M-KOPA in 2019, right? So this was a few months before things just fell apart in 2020, right? So what was your experience like? Obviously, first of all, moving to Nairobi and then, joining this team, and suddenly, boom, March, lockdown everywhere. everywhere just, it was just scattered. What was your experience? Tell us a little bit about your experience with managing a large team, especially during a crisis like COVID-19 crisis. What was your experience like managing a large team, especially as chief of staff, which I've only heard on Scandal? Is it lie? No, not only on Scandal. Like, we know that this is a thing that you hear with presidential elections and as a chief of staff, but tell us about that experience and any tips you have for managers who are on the call or to be managers about how to effectively manage a large team during a crisis.
Yeah, I'm speaking here, calling from my house. I have been, and the whole company has been working from home for basically almost a year now. So yeah, totally feeling the drag of the kind of pandemic. But maybe before I answer the question, just giving a little bit of context about M-KOPA as an organization and our size and how we're distributed. So M-KOPA, at the time that the pandemic started, we had about 1,000 employees. Most of those employees were in Kenya, Uganda, and Nigeria, but we also had employees in UK and Hong Kong. And then much of our software development team is also remote. So in total, I'm sure we have employees in over 10 different countries to begin with. And the funny thing about chief of staff is I actually myself don't have a large team, but I do a lot of the coordinating and communication across the company on mission, on priorities, on kind of communicating results outwards. But yeah, just going back to the pandemic, I remember, because we have a team in Hong Kong, like we started taking COVID serious a lot earlier, probably than most companies on the continent, because we had to make a lot of changes already for our team that was in Hong Kong, where, of course, COVID hit a lot earlier. And I think that was really useful because we learned a lot from the things that we had to do in our Hong Kong office or in our Hong Kong kind of production facilities. So that was one thing. But we ended up basically in the last 2 weeks of March deciding to implement a work from home policy for everybody. And you can imagine with 1,000 people across multiple countries, this was a huge amount of work. We had literally like a COVID task force meeting every week, trying to figure out what do we need to do to adapt. And in the end, within 2 weeks, everybody was working from home. Not only that, we also said you can work from anywhere. So for example, I took that opportunity to be back in South Africa, closer to the family, which meant a lot to me. And there were lots of other employees who were able to take advantage of that opportunity. But that was a big transition for us. And a few things that we had to do differently when we started working from home was just, I would say number one was just like over communicate. Like I think at the time, our country MDs were now sending every Monday morning an update. Here's the COVID situation in our country. Here's how M-KOPA is dealing with it. If you need help, these are the places that you can go. Kind of keeping people really informed across the entire company when there are different things happening in different countries was really important. And that was like a big kind of thing that a lot of the country leaders did to make sure that their teams are informed. Over and above that, I think the second thing was we had to be way more intentional about connections across the company. When we were in person and in the office, it's so easy to have these serendipitous kind of conversations and connections with employees. And it was just so hard with everybody being at home, being by themselves, being in lockdowns. And so we did a whole bunch of connection activities across the company, coffee breaks, career socials, lots of all hands meetings. You basically had to build a lot of redundancy into your existing internal communication plan to make sure that people really feel connected and they have a chance to connect to other people who are not necessarily in their team or function that they work in. So those are really two big things that we did. And I think the last really important one is just, I would say just like taking care of our people and all of them. Like at M-KOPA, we have over 1,000 employees, but we also have over 6,000 now active agents who are out in the field actually selling products. And obviously they were going to be very impacted in areas that were going to be a lockdown. So both the employees and the company put money together to basically supplement the income of these agents who usually earn on commission if there was a lockdown and they couldn't earn any money. And then we also upgraded, obviously, the health insurance across the whole company, including for our sales agents. And, in the end, we came out of COVID-19, we grew 40% year on year in terms of revenue. And if one of the things that I love, feedback from the company was people saying, I'm really happy about the results that we achieved as a company, but more than anything, I'm more proud of the way that we did it. We did it without putting kind of anybody at risk. And for anybody who was out there in the field, they had everything that they needed to be kind of protected. So yeah, that was really the COVID experience for us and some of the things that we had to do a little bit differently to kind of get through together as a team.
That's really great. I love the over communicate line. I think that because we were so unprepared for the arrival of the pandemic, a lot of companies struggled with communicating with their team members or communicating what their team members needed to know, right? So I love this idea of over communication because now everyone is working from home. And like you said, you can't be in the office having these conversations anymore. So it's important that managers and leaders are able to disseminate information as quickly as possible, but also as clearly as possible. And I love the idea of implementing connection breaks. That's great. Sounds like virtual water cooler, if that's possible, like, okay, at this time for 30 minutes, we're all going to go on a coffee break, let's get on a video call and let's chat, right? I think that that's great because again, it doesn't quite replace that in-person connection that you form with your colleagues, but at least you're trying something new. You're trying to make the best out of the situation at hand. So thank you. Great, great, great response. Okay. Down to our last 3 questions from us before we take some audience questions. What are some common misconceptions you've had to correct in the course of your career, right? What are some things you used to believe that were impossible that now you're thinking, actually, I think that this is doable, or I believe that this is doable? Tell us some of these misconceptions and how you were able to unlearn them or let them go.
Yeah, I will actually share one that in its own way is very recent. And I'm still unlearning it. And I think it's this, sometimes you just think, oh, if I just keep my head down and get the work done and the work is amazing, I will progress. And I think in the end, like, that's not quite enough. Like, I'm the kind of person who has always been a little bit uncomfortable with like self-promotion. Like, even, you know, I'll be honest, even with this week, as we were advertising this event and people were reaching out to me, I was like, I was like kind of feeling a little bit like, yeah, I don't know what the word is. But yeah, I think, you know, I historically have had a little bit of challenge, kind of self-promoting for myself. And I've been lucky that I have had bosses who are very, you know, who push me, who are like, no, you're going to go do this. This is great. You should do it. Or like, whether it's within the organization or whether it's with an opportunity like this. So I think, you know, yeah, your work should speak for itself, but don't be afraid of a little self-promotion. It's something that I'm still kind of getting comfortable with, but I think it's something that can really go a long way in one's career.
Yeah, oh wow, I can relate so hard with that. I'm really shy about self-promotion as well. I'm not gonna front. So exactly how you felt about pushing this event was how I felt as well. So Bolu had to like keep nudging me, like, make sure you share, you know. But I think, again, this ties back to the point you made about there being more mentors and sponsors. So you have people who are pushing you and saying, hey, beyond actually putting your head down and doing the work, there will come a time where you will need to step out into the forefront, and you're going to need to have conversations like this one, because now you're an expert in your field and people are going to want to hear from you. So I love that. I think that that's something that we can all take away from that. There's self-promotion and there's arrogance. No one is asking you to be arrogant. No one's asking if arrogant, but you know, if the time comes for you to put yourself out there, you know, if you're not feeling confident about it, make sure you have people around you who can push you to the front and say, hey, this is the best time to do this. So thank you. That's definitely a misconception that needs to be corrected by a lot of us. And now, second to last question: what role do you see technology playing in Africa in this decade? And I think this decade is important because, I mean, since I have been cognizant of technology, I don't think I have ever seen such an impact as technology has had, especially coming out of the pandemic. And we saw how heavily the world relied on technology, especially in Africa. What do you think? What do you see? Do you have any foresight into what you think is going to change, what you think will be birthed, you know, in the next 10 years, where there'll be improvements and things that we may decide, okay, this isn't working for Africa anymore, let's try something else? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a big question. I'm not going to be bold enough to try and predict the future here, but I can tell you about the trends that I think are really going to shift things. And I think the first one is one that we at M-KOPA are obviously working very hard on, which is smartphone penetration growth, and alongside that, internet penetration growth. So, I mean, smartphone penetration across the continent ranges anywhere between 30 to 45%, depending on where you are, with the exception of South Africa, which is always the case. But I think really the power of what's going to happen when there is a smartphone in the hands of every African adult. You know, like we're starting to see some early iterations of that or impact of that in the commerce space. I mean, I live in Nairobi. I can order something on Instagram like right now, pay via M-PESA, and then tomorrow there'll be a boda guy who'll deliver it to my house, right? So that's those how really the smartphone penetration is going to change commerce is I think really huge, and it goes beyond e-commerce, right? One of the things that's really interesting about Africa is that e-commerce is not super high, and a lot of people who are doing e-commerce are huge companies. What's really interesting is what's happening with small businesses who are selling through like WhatsApp or selling through like Instagram. That's really impactful at that kind of smaller business layer. And I think there are really more exciting things that may come out of that. The second is like in financial services in particular, I would say that, I don't know, like fintech in Africa is still at like level 1. I think people are like, oh, look at all this funding that's coming to fintech. Wow. And sometimes like entrepreneurs will pitch and somebody will be like, oh no, fintech in Africa is saturated. I'm like, no, it's only just started. A lot of the companies that are raising financing right now at large scale are mostly payments companies. We're still building the rails on which a lot of the other really interesting innovations and products are going to build out of. So one of the areas that I'm really super excited about, not just personally, but also at M-KOPA, is that nexus between once we've built the infrastructure for payments and all these other things, what other products really come on top in the fintech space. Yeah, and I think lastly, man, the money will keep coming. The amount of capital that's coming into the fintech space in Africa is amazing. What I'm excited about is seeing more of some of the founders who were really successful 2 to 3 years ago start to invest themselves in African companies, because a lot of the capital comes from international funds or funding organizations. But I think over the last 2 years in particular, there have been a lot of micro VC funds or syndicates that are actually funded by other Africans, particularly who are active in the ecosystem. So that's a trend that I'm really super excited about.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, these 3, I think, are very, very important predictions. I love what you said about fintech being at level 1, because interestingly enough, I saw a tweet this morning of someone saying that, oh, like, you know what, we've seen enough fintech funding. Now it's time for healthcare. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. We want to see more health and femtech companies, but fintech is still like, we're just gaining traction, right? And, a lot of African countries obviously have different regulations. So what works for a fintech company in Nigeria may not work for a fintech company in Kenya, right? So we have to understand that even to build this unified payment structure in Africa, there's a lot of moving parts, and funding will make those parts move a lot quicker. And then I also love what you said about successful African founders investing back in the country, investing in companies that are starting off. And we're seeing this with E and Future Future of Africa. He has this fund where they do invest in African companies, and the investors are Africans for the most part, So you're right that we need to see more of that. And I believe that more founders, especially successful founders, are beginning to do that now. But definitely in this decade, we should see a lot more African companies being backed by African VCs, African founders as well. Thank you for that. And then finally, the last question from us, which is a very personal question from me. Where the media is concerned, where storytelling is concerned in Africa, where we're talking about technology in Africa, what kind of stories should we be telling? Are we on the mark, or do you believe that, okay, we could benefit from touching on XYZ here? I think that we should see more of this, but we're not seeing enough of it. What do you think? Tell us. And we're open to learning, especially at TechCabal. We want to know what gaps we could be filling and how we can go about it.
Yeah, this is a great question. I think historically in the tech space, like, I don't know, I feel like 80% of the news is about closing fundraising rounds, which is great. Obviously, that's a huge event for any company. But I think there are definitely more angles and perspectives that would be really interesting. The first one I already mentioned before, which is really telling the diverse stories of exciting career opportunities across tech. I think that's just good for the whole ecosystem in terms of attracting more people into the ecosystem and showing them what's possible. The second would be the voice of the customer. A lot of the time in tech, we write about things from the perspective of the investor or the perspective of the company or the ecosystem, but we don't write a lot of, you don't see a lot out there that's written from the perspective of the customer, you know? There's been a ton of investment that's been made in the fintech space over the last, year or so. What's that doing on the ground? What does that mean for a normal person in Nairobi or in Accra? Those really kind of human element stories about how the impact of this funding and this innovation that's coming in is affecting people on the ground, I think would be something valuable for all of us to see. And then the last one is something that I think is happening a lot more, which is, just more data out there, right? Like, gosh, 5 years ago, if you wanted to know which companies got funded in Africa in the last year, it was almost impossible. But I think that's really shifting. There are lots of publications that are doing, annual publications on the funding that's been raised, which investors are active. So there's a lot more transparency and data on which companies are really operating. But yeah, I think for me, the humans in the tech, more stories about that, whether it's the leadership at different companies across the board or the kind of the end customers that are really kind of benefiting from all this innovation in the space.
Hey, yeah, I'm glad you said that, because we're hearing a lot of people ask for these human angle stories. They want to know more about people behind the scenes. But what you just said about hearing from the perspective of the customers or the users, I think that's really important. And I'm hoping that when I pitch it to my newsroom, they don't throw tomatoes at me. But I would love to know, beyond these companies, okay, they're saying that, okay, for example, Flutterwave raises money and they're saying, okay, we want to do this to expand and do this and do that. Okay, that's great. But let's hear from the people who are actually interacting with these products. What are the experiences? The money being put behind these products and services, are they actually making the impact that they're supposed to make, which is to simplify XYZ for an end customer or for a merchant? So that's definitely an angle to explore, and one that we don't see come out of the African media space. So thank you so much for that. And when you say more data and insight, that's great, because the people who are hosting this event on behalf of TechCabal, that's TechCabal Insights team. I mean, they do a great job of putting together this data. And like you said, 5 years ago, it would have been impossible to know how many African companies have received funding. But now we are able to get those data and those insights, especially directly from the founders, who we're hoping will continuously to be willing to share this information with us, because I think it's important for people to know what's possible and what is impossible. So thank you so much, Tsakane. We are going to move to audience questions now. Let me start with Nicholas. Nicholas asks, as a chief of staff, how do you find time with the CEO when everyone is competing for his or her time? And then how do you navigate chains of command / hierarchy, providing directions to executives and to employees who don't respond to you? Okay, so 2 questions. How do you find time with the CEO? And then how do you navigate chains of command and hierarchy, especially when you face resistance?
Yeah, well, the first one's kind of easy. In most companies, as a chief of staff, you're kind of the right-hand person to the CEO or whoever you are chief of staff to. And the goal is that you, to some extent, like multiply them, like you make them more effective. And so if you're doing that and adding value in doing that, you don't have to compete for their time when you add value, because they know that, spending 30 minutes with you means they're going to be able to delegate, 3 or so things that they then don't have to worry about that you'll take care of. So I think the key is to make sure that you are adding value to whoever you're chief of staff to, and you're helping them be more effective. Then you probably don't have to compete for that time. On the second one, yeah, that's a really interesting question, particularly because you will, as a chief of staff, often maybe project manage something that doesn't have a clear owner across the company, and you will be working with people that may not directly report to you. And those people could be senior to you, right? They could be other kind of C-suite executives in the company, or they could be more junior. For me, what I found helps us as M-KOPA and helps me is that every quarter we set our kind of quarterly objectives and key results. So we use the kind of famous OKR methodology that's been made popular by Google and others. And I think it's way easier to get people in line and do what they need to do when the organizational objectives are clear. Like, this is a priority for the entire company. This is how this project is connected to that priority, and get in line, right? And I think the other thing is we also have a huge feedback culture. We use this amazing platform called Culture Amp. Somebody was also asking about systems. We use it to manage mostly our priorities, our performance reviews, and feedback across the company. And because of that feedback, I think if somebody's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're kind of multiple nodes of feedback to kind of, nudge them along. But yeah, that's less of a challenge when the priorities at the organizational layer are clear, and how the things that you're asking for are connected to those priorities.
I love that. Nicholas, I hope that answers your question. I mean, definitely that feedback culture is very important. And ensuring that it's like 360 feedback, and it's managers to their subordinates to their managers, and ensuring that cycle continues. It's a great response. So David's question is, what tech tools do you use in managing not just your workforce, the company's workforce, but specifically your team, and the teams that you work with? You've mentioned this one that you use for feedback and performance reviews. Any other tools?
Yeah, I mean, there are quite a lot. There are different tools kind of used across different companies. I'll just name a few. From a communication standpoint, we use Microsoft Teams. I love it. I always have my Teams open and chatting to everybody across the company. For kind of more from an HR perspective, we're big fans of Culture Amp, which, as I said, we use for kind of performance reviews and feedback. One of the things that I love most about M-KOPA is we're super obsessed with data. And so, we're big users of Microsoft Power BI. And I love that I can wake up in the morning and open Power BI and know how many phones we sold yesterday. In fact, I get I get an hourly report on all the sales. That's a huge tool for making sure that, you set targets for people across the company. You need to have a clear, let's call it scoreboard, right? Where people can go to see, are we winning? Are we losing? And so I think that's really important. That's a really important tool that we use across the company as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think everyone should be obsessed with data, because without data, you don't know what's working and what isn't working. David has another question, and he said, what are the biggest challenges you face in attracting and managing talent at M-KOPA?
Yes, I get to do a hiring plug. We are hiring at M-KOPA. I think where we found things challenging is in more of the more scarce skills, particularly in Africa. So hiring for software developers, with so many startups at scale, it's really competitive. So particularly hiring software developers, or hiring product managers, or hiring strategy people, most of whom are either working at a big corporate or working at McKinsey, earning lots of money. Those are probably the three pools, or like in credit data science and analytics. So those are some of the I would say like rare skill areas where it's really hard to attract the right talent at a reasonable price. Like we can't compete with big corporates on salaries. So that's also the other challenge. So we do our best to showcase what else we offer beyond just the comp package, obviously at M-KOPA, right? The community of people that you're going to be working with, the impact that we're making on our customers, and so on. But yeah, we're definitely hiring for product managers, software engineers, people across the strategy team. If you're interested in any of those roles, check out our website and feel free to DM me on Twitter or on LinkedIn to find out more.
Yes, please feel like you want to work for M-KOPA. They're a great company and you want to add value, especially provide value for underbanked and underrepresented Africans. Please go ahead. Tsakane, please drop your Twitter name in the chat box so that they can find you. Thank you for that. Thank you, David. That's a really, really, really great question because yeah, attracting great talent, especially with how the market is competitive and all of that is really difficult, but I think that was a great response. Okay, so Halima has a question about mentors and sponsors. She says she understands the great importance they have in one's life. My question is, how do you get to meet someone to be a mentor or a sponsor? So how do you shoot your shot? How do you shoot your mentor shot?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, there are multiple ways to do this. I think the first is just people who work with you, whether in your own company. Like if you find somebody that you really admire, like just reach out to them. And I think what's helpful is being clear on what you are asking for. Do you know what I mean? In terms of where are the areas that you need guidance? Because in the end, the mentorship or sponsorship, it's a two-way relationship. You have to start somewhere. It's best to start with something specific to get the relationship going. And then over time, you can see if it's like, oh, you helped me with this particular challenge. And, that's the kind of end of the relationship, or if it's something more long-term. So the first place is just, people you work with in your company. The second is people that you might be working with through your role now, but they're at other companies. That's also, another great source. And then lastly, there are some people that I've just reached out to on Twitter or LinkedIn, just saying, look, I really admire your work. I'm really inspired by what you do. And then, if I have a really specific ask, I will ask them. I don't always get a response, but I've had at least one mentor that I met that way. I just messaged them on Twitter and they happened to respond, and we've built a great relationship since then. So I would say just don't be shy to ask. And then two, it helps if you have a specific area that you are asking for help on that's clearly relevant for that person. And then, it might take a few tries before you find somebody that really gels with you.
Yeah, that's a really great response, Halima. I hope that answers your question. Definitely reach out. But like Tsakane said, in your immediate work circle, there has to be one or two people who inspire you. If you're working in a company and you're not inspired by the people, you have my permission to leave. Okay, go work somewhere where they'll inspire you. All right. Please don't tell your boss I said that to him. Thank you. Okay. So we have a question from Chanda. I hope I'm really pronouncing that properly. She says, he or she says, Africa is a continent containing several young people who have innovative ideas that can help solve many of the challenges it's facing. How can young people easily find funding? Is this a question you can answer or give any sort of push people in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, there are actually now tons of resources on this, right? I won't kind of answer it directly in terms of naming the resources, but the first thing you do is look at the funding reports and see who are the investors that are funding enterprises at the level that you're at, right? Like whether you're a seed stage or Series A investors, you first need to figure out who are the most relevant investors. And there are really amazing reports now coming out from Disrupt Africa, Brighter Bridges, even the stuff coming out from TechCabal that will help you narrow down those investors. But there are also lots of people in the space who now make like lists literally that you can access that have all the different investors. So I think there are actually a ton of resources out there now. And then there's obviously the kind of slightly infamous pitch competitions. You know, they're a good way to get started, right? When you don't quite have a lot of traction yet and investors may not want to invest in you. But yeah, I think there are now quite a few resources out there that people can use to figure out where to find funding.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are even smaller companies that are very much invested in giving money to new and young companies, you know. So instead of looking for the big boys, right, just try to find angel investors or just small collective of investors who are interested in backing exciting projects, you know. So thank you for that. That's it. There are a lot of resources out there, and if it's possible, reach out to people who have also received funding and just ask them. You know, I don't think anyone would not respond to that question because it's such a harmless question, you know. So reach out to more people and ask. Natasha has a question. She said, what is your remit as chief of staff to the CEO versus an executive assistant to the CEO? What are your key roles and responsibilities? Perhaps Natasha is interested in this line of work. I would love to know if it's worth her time because I think it's exciting, you know, so let us know.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And actually, sometimes some chief of staffs just have a different title. But yeah, at M-KOPA, we have a chief of staff and an executive assistant. The difference between those things for us is that the executive assistant is very much focused on a lot of the more kind of administrative activities in the CEO's office. But as chief of staff, it's really hard, honestly, to describe what I do, but I would say the broad areas in the business that I typically work are strategy. So for example, when I joined M-KOPA, we were just about to scale smartphone financing, and I worked on developing our strategy for that, doing some market research, a lot of the early meetings with our partners, you know, presenting that strategy to our investors and our board. So like those are some of the examples of things that I would have been doing in strategy. The second is strategic finance or strategic planning. So that has to do with like, you know, developing the company's like 5-year plan, everything related to investor relations, fundraising, you know, communicating with the investors that we already have. And then the last one, which I've recently started doing, which I find a lot of fun, is I manage corporate communications as well. So for me as chief of staff at M-KOPA, those are the broad roles that I fall into. I think there are multiple different types of chief of staff roles. So whenever you see a role advertised for chief of staff, it's important to really understand what the organization is trying to fill in terms of gaps with that particular role, because it can be so different depending on whether you're joining a Series A company, where sometimes the role is more like a COO, versus when you're joining a much later stage company that already has a strong C-suite team, and there are very specific things that they want the chief of staff to do.
Okay, thank you, Natasha. I hope that yes, there are definitely differences in the role. But I really hope that answers Natasha's question. And then finally, from this Q&A here, Emmanuel Peters is an ambitious entrepreneur who wants to assemble tech guys to work in his team, but does not have the finances to lure them in. And you've just spoken about how, a lot of young or new or emerging companies are competing with big tech companies. So do you have any tips, any advice? Because I know that that's a really, really tough one, to be able to get the talent you need, but not be able to afford them.
Yeah, I mean, there's only one thing you can do as an early stage entrepreneur to lure tech talent, and it's to give them equity in your company, right? Mm-hmm. Because you probably can't compete with a lot of the existing companies in terms of compensation or salaries, But if these are really early employees, you can enable them to participate in the upside of the company. And the way that you can do that is by giving them stock options in the company. And I think this is a really great employee incentive tool, not just for tech people, but for all roles in a company across, African startups. If it's a really important role and you can't pay what you know is the market value, but you're trying to hire top tier talent, stock options are a really great way to enhance the compensation package, because it means if the company does well, like we've seen with companies like Flutterwave and Paystack, it means the early employees who got stock options, they're going to be hopefully millionaires one day. So I think that's a really great way to attract talent when you can't afford to pay the market salaries.
That seems to be the only solution. Or you can bring people in who have the money and they can be co-founders and they can be the ones who will be responsible for paying the hefty salaries. Yeah, because I mean, if you're noticing the trend now in Africa, it's that a lot of people are, going after these skills because they actually want to earn money. They want to earn more money. So if you're going to reach out to them to work for you and you want the expertise, you got to give them a little something, you got to sell them the vision. I hope that they believe in it long enough to stay, at least help you in the beginning. So that's our audience questions. Now, some people did send in questions while they were registering for the event. So I'll read out a few of them to you, and let's see. Some of them have been answered, so I'll pick some that you haven't answered. So we have one here. What's the best way to motivate staff in a startup? That's a really good question. How do you motivate staff in a startup, especially early stage?
Yeah. I mean, I've technically not worked in an early stage startup, but I'll try my best to answer the question. I think the first one is, at any company, it is really helpful when the priorities of the company are clear to everybody. There's nothing worse than having a group of people that are honestly just pulling in different directions. And so I think like the number one thing you have to figure out how to do is at the early stage is, how do you communicate, your priorities and goals as a company and make sure that's something that's transparent to everybody across the company? Because that's also really helpful when, I'm overwhelmed and I have a huge to-do list and I'm like, okay, what of this is nice to have versus like critical? And I can always go back to the kind of company OKRs and say, okay, here's what's really important that's going to move the needle for the company. The second is equity, right? I think especially at that early stage, when people, it's about alignment, right? A salary is nice, it's guaranteed, you have it, it's great. But equity means if the company does well, you do well. It's obviously not guaranteed, like the company might fail or the company might never sell or IPO or anything, so you don't know if you're going to get it. But I think particularly for early employees in very senior roles, that's a really great way to motivate them and make sure that their incentives are aligned with the company's success. The last thing I would say is just take care of your people. Like you take care of your people, they'll take care of your customers. And this can be really simple things like, whether it's having health insurance packages, whether it's having like even small perks like access to a gym or things like that can really go a long way. So for any particular market that you're in, and for us, these perks can differ market by market, find out what are the things from a lifestyle perspective that really makes your employees' lives easier, and are those things that your company can help provide or subsidize to some extent. So yeah, those are the three big things that I would highlight.
Great. This is a really good question. How can impact or purpose-driven startups scale whilst not compromising on their core values? I really like this question for two reasons. One, I I was doing some research on Netflix's culture, and it's gone around that the culture is highly competitive, even to an unhealthy degree, right? So which means that if you're coming in, you have to understand that you're not coming in to faff around. There's work, but work that can be interpreted as just like hard, really hard, like backbreaking work, right? So there's a chance that people who may have worked there and have left may have felt that, I feel like when the company was growing, they began to kind of throw away their core values, and that didn't matter anymore. And it was about numbers and ensuring XYZ, right? And the same goes for companies who are also now raising a lot of money, which means a lot more pressure, a lot more demand, right? And at that point, it's no longer we're a happy family, but we need to make money like quickly. We have to be successful. So what would you say? Is it even possible to scale and not compromise on core values? Is that even possible?
Yeah, this is a very great question. Like, I think in the impact space, they often call it mission drift as the organization grows. And I think the key is to be really clear about that mission. And so one is being clear about the mission. Two is, if you care about impact as much as you care about commercial results, always communicate those two things together. When you tell your employees, your investors, how you have performed, give them both the commercial data and the impact data, right? Because what you want to do is stay accountable to both the promises that you've made to your investors to commercially succeed, but the promises that you have made to yourself as an organization on the impact that you want to achieve. So I think that's really huge. And just to give an example on mission, I think if you have a good mission, it's easier to decide whether something you're thinking about doing is aligned or not to the company's goals. So for example, the history of M-KOPA is very much, people know M-KOPA as a like maybe Kenyan solar company or like a African pay-as-you-go solar company. And when we started selling smartphones, people were like, hold on a minute, like we thought you were a solar company. And it's like, no, our mission as M-KOPA is to provide financing that makes everyday essentials accessible to everyone.
Right.
And so that can mean multiple assets, right? Today it's solar home systems, phones, televisions. Tomorrow it could be motorbikes. But that will still be within mission for us. So I think having a really great mission statement that really touches what you're trying to do helps when you're trying to make decisions about whether a commercial opportunity is aligned to the company's mission or not. And then two, if you really care about impact, then when you communicate your results to stakeholders, always include both commercial and impact data. And we do that every year. We publish our annual impact report because we care about impact a lot. So yeah, that's the advice that I would give for anybody who's like thinking about how to balance those two objectives in a company.
That's a very response. Keep your eye on the mission at all times. I have one here. As a chief of staff in a Series A stage, so what's your recommendation in managing transition from fixer to company organizer? So I guess that's moving from having a reactive response to everything that's happening versus being proactive in your role and saying, okay, as COS, I'm not reacting to every emergency, but I'm ensuring that, like you said, the person I'm assigned to, I'm bringing value to them and ensuring that they need to do whatever they need to do without worrying about the small stuff.
Oh, man. That is a very difficult question. I don't know if I have an answer to that question, but yeah, there is always, and I think this is true for any leader in an organization. They're always just like fires burning, especially in high growth companies. But then there's some of the strategic stuff that might not be immediate, right? There's stuff that might really come to fruition in like 3, 6, 12 months. And you really have to strike a balance between those two things. I must be honest, I'm still learning. Like, I don't have like a easy formula that I can give you to do that. But one thing that I really find helpful is In the same way that we have objectives and key results at the kind of organizational layer, we cascade those down to employees. And so, for example, right now, I have 3 objectives and key results. And what I do is every Monday morning, when I'm looking at my to-do list or things that have to be done, I say, which of those things align to my key results? And that's what I prioritize. But then, of course, every week, something breaks somewhere, something happens that you have to fix. And you have to think about, well, how bad is that fire? Like, what are the consequences of, whatever problem that has come up? And, what happens if I don't fix it this week or next week? And that helps you figure out whether it's something that, needs to be prioritized even ahead of your OKRs or not. But, this is a really difficult question, but reflecting on this for me, every week, what do I have to do versus, my OKRs is a really great way to make sure that I'm continuing to keep that balance on fixing stuff versus working on stuff that's really building value for the future.
I love that. I love this idea of on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, whatever the case may be. At BCM, we set individual OKRs. So they are company-wide OKRs and individual OKRs. And I think I'm gonna steal this from you. I'm just gonna open it and be like, okay, this is what I need to focus on, And I think that, that means that you're spending less time reacting and putting out fires, and you're actually like doing the work you've been hired to do. And then you have space, mind space, mental space to take care of the, things that just happen because that's life, So I really, really love that response. I've got one question here from Maria. I need a cup of coffee. Okay, she said, when launching into a new market, for example, your most recent market, Nigeria, what are some of your key priorities? Is it attracting talent or partnerships? I don't know if you were involved in that conversation, but if you were involved or in conversations where, we're talking about launching into a new market, do you know what matters the most to M-KOPA? Is it, making sure you do hire the right team, which is important? Or is it like, okay, let's hit the ground running with getting some partners that will help us push this brand and push our products?
Yeah, talent first, man, on everything. Because if you don't hire the right talent, you won't have the people you need to execute on those partnerships, right? Like, you'll disappoint those partners. So for us, first and foremost, is really finding the talent that we need. And right now, for example, in Nigeria, like we have a team of about, I think, 40 people, but it's continuing to grow. We're hiring in our customer care and our data and credit teams. So I would say talent first. And part of the reason you want talent first is because when you go to a new market, your existing team will do a lot of research and try to really understand the landscape, but nothing can replace the insight of somebody who's lived and worked in that market, right, for years. That's not something that you can just, export. So that's why really talent first when you're expanding into new markets matters a lot for us, is that, local context that people who are from that market are going to be able to give you that maybe a Kenyan, will not be able to give about the Nigerian market. And then secondly, if you don't have that great talent in place, you have a bunch of, like, your partners won't take you seriously. They'll be like, oh, you're telling us you want to expand in Nigeria or Ghana, but you have nobody here. Like, we keep getting on the phone with this person in Uganda or the UK, like, you're not serious. So that's the other important piece. Like, those partners that you want, they will want FaceTime. They want a real contact person that they can see and meet with on the ground, who understands their local context. So absolutely, those partnerships matter, but I think talent first.
Talent first. Yep, that's very, 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 very key. Just a few more before we begin to round up. I don't want this conversation to end because you're giving such great tips. Okay, so someone is asking, what are the 3 top priorities for tech companies in Africa or globally in order to address the gender gap in senior management roles? I think you did respond to this by saying definitely, fund more women and get more women in senior leadership positions. But I like that the person said, what are the top 3 priorities? So if you could just break that down and say, okay, when you're thinking about, filling this gap, or when you want to address, as a company, you want to address this gap, what should your priorities be? If you're sitting in that room and this discussion is going on, what would you say to your CEO or to the talent management team at M-KOPA?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is when women actually do, we tend to focus a lot on hiring, right? Like, how do I get women to actually kind of come into the company? So that's one piece, right? Like trying to find a diversified talent pool coming into the company. And I think that's a lot easier for some of the more entry-level roles, but for some of the leadership positions, it's useful to try and find more diverse places where you're actually advertising your jobs, getting women who already work in your company to promote those jobs, specifically going out to certain women communities to promote those jobs, right? You kind of have to go out of your way to make sure that you'll get a diverse candidate pool for your hiring. That's the first one. The second one is, once those people enter your workforce, what are you doing to make sure that they're continuing to grow in your organization and that you will actually be able to retain them? And, at M-KOPA, we specifically have a group that's focused on women in M-KOPA. We have mentorship specifically for women in the company, and lots of events around that. But I think something that's also really important for women, particularly those who want to have families, is, it's things like, what does your maternity policy look like? What is the support that you provide to not only new mothers, but new fathers as well? Like a lot of the research shows that the fact that paternity leave is so short has an impact on women and their careers as well. So thinking about the family support that you provide to employees, not just for women, or not just for mothers, but for mothers and fathers as well, taking that holistic approach. So I think, those are the 2 big priorities you care about. One is going out of your way to make sure that you get a diversified candidate pool. 2 is, once women are in your workforce, what are the things that you're doing to ensure that their needs are taken care of, but also that they're able to continue growing and stay with the organization.
Yeah, it's not enough to bring them in, but how are you ensuring that, number 1, they're succeeding in their roles, and number 2, you are taking care of specific needs that companies should take care of, like you said, not just maternity leave, but paternity leave as well. That is impactful to both women and men as well, especially when they're starting new families. So thank you for that. Now I want to switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about how you unwind. So if you guys don't know, Tsakane plays Fortnite. I think that's really badass. While the rest of us are coming home and drinking tea and watching crappy shows on Netflix, Tsakane is playing Fortnite. That's how Tsakane unwinds. But tell us, who is your favorite character in Fortnite?
The banana.
Yeah.
Done. Easy.
So not expecting that. I love it. 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 How do you feel when you're playing Fortnite? Like, what kind of zone do you get into? When you're, using your pad, you're in there. What zone do you get into?
Look, I think it's I love playing a lot of different video games. For me, it's just a really wonderful way to unwind from work. After you're done with a long work day, you just want something to kind of break the day, create that transition from working to relaxed. And so I love that it completely focuses you. There's no room for work thoughts to creep into your mind when you're playing video games because you're so focused. And then when you're done, it's like, your mind is kind of clear. That's what I really love about it. My other escape is just reading. I love fiction, particularly sci-fi. So every day I spend, before bed, 30 to 60 minutes reading. And that's also a different way of escaping, a different way of learning about life elsewhere. So yeah, those are my two favorite ways to unwind.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And then this is my final question before we wrap up. I like this question. How do you handle being strict? I don't want to use the word strict. I want to use the word, what's a better word for this? How do you handle being, I guess, in your role, authoritative or disciplined? Because I think when this person is using strict, I think they mean like direct,
Yeah.
How do you handle being direct and not labeled as bitter or because I'm a woman? How do you rebrand yourself? I think that this is a really key question, because this is something that we struggle with here, Nigerian women, where if we're being direct or, just cutting out the unnecessary, mannerisms, where, especially in the workplace, we're accused of being aggressive or just labeled weird names that men don't get those same labels when they're doing the exact same thing, so so this person is asking, okay, how do you rebrand yourself? Let's say that's what has followed you all your career, despite some soul searching and deciding that, what, this is not my problem, this is something that is coming externally. How do we women get past that stage where we don't care anymore about those labels and we're saying, hey, I'm just doing my job at the end of the day and I'm not being rude, I'm not being disrespectful? How do we get past that?
I mean, this is really interesting. It's a really hard question, and it's one of the biggest biases against women, right? We have to walk this really tight rope. If you're really nice, people are, kind of label you as kind of like ineffective or just too friendly. And then if you're really direct, it's like, oh, she's bossy. So it's really difficult. I hate that I have to think about this when I need to be direct with someone, but anyway, I think the one thing to mention is that bias comes from both men and women, right? So it's not only men who will tend to label women like this when this is happening, but it comes from women as well. So I think, obviously the first thing is for all of us, both men and women, to really check ourselves. Check yourself when you're reacting, when, a woman leader is talking in the company, and always ask yourself, like, where is this coming from? Where is this kind of feeling that I have coming from? And does it have anything to do with the fact that you're a woman? But in terms of how I manage this personally, especially when I have to be direct, I love the good old sandwich method, which is sandwiching the bad feedback inside some good feedback, because often a lot of the time when you have to be direct with someone, it's probably not that they completely suck at everything. So it helps to start the conversation with something a little bit positive, and then sandwich in maybe the negative feedback, and then make it constructive, right? If there are ways you think they can improve or ways you can offer them help, offer that as well. So that's one way I generally like to deal with that. But I totally hate that this is something we even have to think about and worry about as women, but also remind everybody this is a bias that comes from both men and women. So, we all need to kind of check ourselves.
Absolutely. I love that. So check yourself before you wreck yourself. # check yourself. And second of all, I like this feedback sandwich. I use it as well. I think I want to challenge women who are listening. When you are receiving feedback and you're feeling that it is biased because of your gender, I think you should definitely check for the feedback sandwich. Constructive feedback should not just point out what you did not do well. It should point out what you did well. And then it should offer possible solutions for you to improve. If you feel like the feedback you're getting is kind of making you feel small or is singling you out because you're a woman, I think that you can demand, hey, actually, this is the kind of feedback I'm looking for. Can I have it? So thank you so much for your time. This has been a fantastic conversation. as a first-time moderator, I have to say you have been a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful guest. Thank you for speaking with us. Thank you for your time. Shout out to M-KOPA for releasing you and allowing us speak to you, and also to Wimbart for helping us, get your schedule aligned with ours. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in. Our next event is March 26th. Am I allowed to say who we're having? Can I say it? It's Spotify. Whoop, 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 whoop. So wherever you are, please, this would be a great one to tune into. As you know, Spotify just launched in a lot of African countries. So please, register for that. It's going to be great. I'm going to be moderating again. If you liked my face, which I hope you did, because I took time to make it look good for you guys, please tune in again because you're going to see the space. Thank you guys so much for joining in. As you guys know, we're TechCabal. We are on social media, TechCabal everywhere. This event was proudly put together, wonderfully put together by the TechCabal Insights team. And this is what they're responsible for doing, putting data together, gathering research intelligence about what's happening in Africa. Like Tsakane said earlier in her conversation, 5 years ago, it would not have been possible to know this information, but people are working hard at it, and TC Insights is one of such teams. So if you're looking to get actionable data, research, and insights, please check out our website. There's a special page dedicated to TC Insights. And then finally, we have our daily newsletter, TC Daily, that goes out every weekday, 7 a.m., Monday to Friday, written by our amazing team, Daniel Muyua, edited by some great people as well, myself included, self-promotion. Hey, what's up? So that's the link there. But then also, it's on our website, so you can head over there. And then, Tsakane, if you have any final words that you'd like to say to us, please go ahead, unmute your mic, and then we'll let you go.
Mine is really short and sweet. This was really awesome. Thank you for having me, and I hope that everything that I've shared today helps a lot of people who are thinking about maybe working in a tech company or in investing. And also, if anybody's really interested in the chief of staff role, I think there'll be more and more roles like this coming out from African startups in particular. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about that. And then to anybody who's interested in roles in M-KOPA as well, check out our website for roles that are open, and feel free to reach out to me directly. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so very much. I believe that's it from us. Thank you everyone for joining in. If you have any comments or questions, please tweet at us. We'll be more than happy to answer them. Have a lovely day. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you next week, Friday.